World War II is filled with battles everyone learns about. Normandy, Pearl Harbor, Iwo Jima, Stalingrad. But in the shadows of those famous battles lies a story so unbelievable, so horrifying, and yet so brave that it is almost completely forgotten by the modern world. Today we look at the story of the Palawan Massacre and the men who survived it against all odds. In 1944, on the remote Philippine island of Palawan, the Japanese military ran a brutal prisoner of war camp. Inside were roughly 150 American soldiers who had survived the fall of Bataan and Corregidor. These men had already endured starvation, disease, and beatings. Many were so thin that their bones pressed through their skin. But for them, the worst day was still ahead. By the end of 1944, American forces were rapidly approaching the Philippines. The Japanese command issued a chilling directive. If the enemy ever landed near a prisoner camp, no prisoner was to survive. The Palawan guards were ordered to exterminate every American. On December 14th, 1944, the prisoners were forced into air raid shelters. At first, they thought it was a drill. Then the guards poured gasoline inside the shelters and lit them on fire. Flames exploded upward. Men screamed as the heat closed in on them. Some burned alive instantly. Others tried to push further back, searching for any corner untouched by flame. Then the gunfire started. Japanese guards stood outside, shooting any man who tried to escape. Bodies piled up at the entrances. Some men begged for mercy. Others jumped out while burning alive, only to be bayoneted or shot as soon as they hit the ground. Out of 150 American prisoners, almost all were murdered, but 11 men refused to die. They ran toward the cliffs. The camp sat on the edge of a high cliff that dropped down to the ocean. Below were sharp rocks and waves crashing against them. The Japanese expected no one would jump. The guards believed the Americans would stay and burn. But 11 men chose the fall. One by one, they dove off the cliff, bullets flying past them, the fire roaring behind them, their skin blistered, their clothes still smoking. Some hit the water hard, some slammed into rocks, breaking bones, but they survived. One man hid under the remains of a burned pier. Another swam underwater until he nearly passed out. Others crawled through mangroves with bayonets stabbing at the water nearby. They moved silently across the shoreline. Some climbed trees and hid among the branches for hours. Others buried themselves in mud and held their breath as patrols passed by feet away. Then something happened that even the survivors could never fully explain. Local Filipino civilians risked their lives to help them. These civilians were not soldiers. They were fishermen, mothers, fathers, ordinary people who saw wounded American soldiers crawling along the beaches and quietly took them into hiding. They fed them. They treated their burns. They guided them through the jungle toward areas controlled by the Philippine resistance. One survivor was carried for miles on a bamboo stretcher. Another was given a small canoe and pushed into the darkness with instructions on where to paddle. Every Filipino who helped them knew that if the Japanese found out, they would be executed, but they did it anyway. Within days, the 11 survivors were rescued by guerrilla fighters and taken to American forces. Their reports shocked U.S. commanders. What they described was so brutal, so unimaginable, that military intelligence initially struggled to believe it. But the evidence was overwhelming. Burned shelters, charred remains, bullet-ridden bodies, all of it confirmed the story. The American response was immediate. When U.S. forces liberated Palawan months later, they found the shallow mass grave and the remains of the men who never escaped. After the war, several of the Japanese officers and guards responsible for the massacre were tried and executed. But here is the part almost no one talks about. The testimony of those 11 survivors became the driving force behind one of the most dangerous and heroic rescue missions in the entire war. Their story led directly to the planning of the Great Raid on Cabanatuan, an operation to rescue more than 500 American prisoners before Japanese troops could murder them too. Without the Palawan survivors, those 500 prisoners would have died. Most people know nothing about these 11 men. They were not part of a major battle. They never stood on a famous beach or raised a flag on a mountain. They were starving prisoners who refused to die. They were men who leaped off a burning cliff rather than give up. And they were saved by brave civilians who risked everything to help strangers. Their story is one of courage where courage should have been impossible. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moment of the war, light survived. And because 11 men lived, hundreds more would be rescued later. This is the story of Palawan, a story the world should never forget. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story. Your support helps Akelmor bring forgotten history back to life.